Welcome to the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis. Join hosts Aaron Smith and Jimmy Young as they dive into the pulse of the cannabis industry, featuring weekly guests who break down big topics like standardization, evolving regulations, and exclusive member spotlights. Get informed, get inspired. And now, here are your hosts, Aaron and Jimmy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to another edition or another episode of the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast. I am Jimmy Young, the co-founder of WPCM-TV and also the executive producer of the Cannabis Coast to Coast news show. And I'm so happy to be joined by Aaron Smith on a somewhat regular basis, but I'm sad today because this is probably going to be the last time that Aaron and I co-host together because Aaron has resigned as executive director of the NCIA. And I should remind Aaron and our audience that once again, this podcast is indeed supported by Buds Group, a consultant group of professionals in accounting and legal and compliance and creative out of the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and also by the Maverick PR Group out of Colorado. All right, Aaron. This is it, the grand finale, if you will. You're a short timer. You're moving on. I think the first question I'd like to ask, though, is why now and why Unite America?
Well, thanks, Jimmy. This is something I'm going to miss for sure. Our coming together every week for this podcast, even though it's been a kind of still a new project. It's something I've always looked forward to every week, and hope that I can join as a guest sometimes here and there if you'll permit me.
Yeah. It's not going to be up to, it's not going to be up to me, but you're welcome anytime. But go ahead,
Aaron. To answer your question, I've worked in the cannabis field for 20 years, which is, a long time for anybody. And I, have been really proud of the progress we've made through the years, seeing us advance state by state by state. But when you look at Congress, Congress is still so far behind the will of the voters that, and even though we've really moved the dial in Congress as well, they are still incapable of actually passing laws because they're not really passing any laws on anything these days.
Right.
It's so dysfunctional up there that I've really, began to realize that there are structural problems within the way that we bring in our elected officials, the way that our government operates, that need to be addressed in order for Congress to even be able to solve challenging issues like outdated cannabis laws, like gun laws, like immigration, all of these issues that are important to Americans. And the work that Unite America does, and that I'll be doing when I join the team, is just that, is addressing some of the structural issues that realign the incentives of elected officials so that they are incentivized to represent the broader voting public and not just a select few primary voting base. Unite works on opening primaries and other issues like ending gerrymandering, ranked choice voting, and a lot of good stuff that I think this country needs.
Absolutely. Can I ask a question, how you feel about, or how Unite America feels, and I don't expect you to be speaking on behalf of that organization just yet, Aaron, about the Electoral College, because that always seems to be in the crosshairs of progressives as they look at the dysfunction of our country.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for Unite, as you said, and I don't know if they work on this at all, to be honest with you. My personal feeling on it is that it is way out of date,
right,
and it is contributing to a lot of the dysfunction in this country. That said, it's very difficult to solve. It's not because it's baked into the Constitution. It would require the kind of bipartisan effort that this country just doesn't see. And because you require 2/3 of the states, and the ratification of a constitutional amendment these days seems next to impossible. So the work that Unite does do, though, is through reforming the way that we select our elected officials, opening primaries to independent voters, that will, over time, elect more bipartisan-minded, problem-solving elected officials, which hopefully could then lead to bigger change down the road. So this is, this is something that, the way that the primary systems work in every state, it's a state by state issue, just like cannabis. So you can put these initiatives on the ballot and change the way a state elects its members of Congress. So, you look at states like Texas and New York and these big states, just it doesn't take a lot of states to really move the dial in Congress.
You have a very large job and
Mhm.
in front of you, Aaron. As someone who's been in the cannabis space for 20 years, I'm guessing you're prepared for the fight when it comes to Capitol Hill and undoing some of the things that have been going on for generations there. And I tell you, I don't envy the amount of work that you have to do, but I respect your desire to take it on. I really do. I'm very impressed with that.
Yeah, thank you. It's being in I started off, like I said, I started in politics, a very idealistic libertarian. I've really changed over time to where I have become much more pragmatic in my older age and in over 20 years of working in politics and seeing that the only way that we're going to make, solve challenges in this country is to compromise and work together. So, we need less ideology and more commitment to the country's future and the commitment to compromising to bring about solutions that might not solve everything or please both all sides, but at least move the country forward. Right now we're kind of held hostage in this way that nothing's moving forward. We're lucky to if Congress keeps the government open these days. It's insane. So it's work that the closer I've gotten to it over the years, the more just imperative it seems to me.
Right, and it makes sense. I mean, let's face it. After working in the cannabis trenches for this many years, you're a seasoned veteran now of what goes on up there, and yet your opening statement about we don't pass bills anymore. What we have is spending bills and budget bills, and then we attach all these amendments to them,
Mhm.
and then it's horse haggling. It's back and forth. It's like, well, if you vote for this, I'll vote for that. I and the people that are getting um, screwed, okay, are the elected, are the people that put them in office in the first place. And
Yeah.
it's really a shame that this is where we're at, because we still all believe this is the greatest country on earth. It has freedoms. It does allow us to be free thinkers and free speech and talking about these issues, but it doesn't seem to be happening in the most critical time of our country right now when we're so divided. It boggles my mind in many ways.
Yeah, yeah, and the horse trading you mentioned doesn't even happen like it used to because you have now these entrenched parties that won't give an inch to each other. And so even, even that, for example, there used to be what they called earmarks in the budget, which meant that every year budget comes up, every single member of the House used to stand up on the House floor and put forward their agenda. There's a community center in blah blah Iowa that needs to have another $5 million to build out its swimming pool, whatever it was. These sorts of things, what we would call pork. But that actually created they did Paul Ryan, I believe, did away with that. So they did away with that a while ago. The cannabis movement used to use that opportunity to introduce amendments like the Warbacher Amendment that has now protected. It's a little opposite of pork. It actually reduces spending and protects medical cannabis patients and providers. But that's gone away. So now Congress isn't, now they can't even get a budget passed because there's less incentive to work together because of those earmarks, which I understand why they got rid of that. But that's something that I guess it's a digression, but that's just another area where we're seeing this congressional dysfunction because there's lack of incentive to work together. They don't live in DC like they used to move their families to DC.
Mhm.
And for a number of reasons, I think that the trend is now to work back in the district and be closer to their voters. Understandable, but that means that on the weekends, members aren't going out to dinner with their families and connecting with each other and, kind of humanizing one another. They just continue to be more divided. And it's concerning. The work I'm doing at Unite is one part of the puzzle. There's a lot of different things that need to happen, I think, to pull us out of this morass, but that's one part of it.
All right. Well, speaking of
Mhm.
morass, let's get into the cannabis thing. And I do want you to look back at the last 20 years that you've been in this space and how much has changed, because it definitely we've hit a wall. We've hit a wall, and I don't know what's going to happen. No one does, I don't think, at this point in the industry. But what is if you could single out what was the most impressive thing that we were able to do as I look back at my 15 years with the NCIA and 5 before that with MPP, what is the thing? Is there one thing in particular? Is it the California leadership that got this thing moving in the right direction, or was it Colorado and Washington being the first 2 states to say yes? What was the one thing that really spurred the growth and kind of got people to start thinking about this plant as a medicinal tool?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of those moments. I think the big one though is those first states. I was here in Colorado on election night in November 2012, and that really just it changed the dynamic in so many ways because we had finally states, that were. I was even surprised because we had medical cannabis already in California for a decade plus prior, and we had medical throughout the country. So we had an industry sort of operating, but just having voters in 2 states in one night move away from pure medical and into adult use just changed the way that the country, I think, looked at this. And then it created laboratories of democracy, as they say, that where we had case studies to point to, because then we were able to, in 2013, 14, 15 years down the road, point back to Colorado and Washington to show that the sky didn't fall, and in fact, youth rates went down,
Right.
traffic accidents went down, taxes went up. All of these data points that then we could use into the next election cycle and inform voters, cycle after cycle, state after state, to grow this to where it's at. And so that was probably the most kind of magical moment. But there's a lot. I mean, when you just look at the whole, just even the moment we're in now, while frustrating because we are up against so many challenges, the fact that seems like most of our main elected officials are at least giving lip service to this issue, which when 20 years ago, that was the opposite. 20 years ago, people were, members of Congress, unprompted, were going down into the well of the House or the Senate and giving speeches on the dangers of marijuana for no reason. You had people doing that just to pander to the drug war, the prohibitionists in their base. Now, the people that were doing that are quiet. They might not be, singing our praises, but they're quiet. And but on the other side, a far larger number of elected officials are out there advocating for reform. And that previously mentioned congressional dysfunction is the only thing in the way of actually seeing it through.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I was privy to looking at a letter that was written by Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. Okay. They are rolling out their medical program. This is the same state that Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell represent, right? And I think they've represented Kentucky since the Civil War. I'm not quite sure, but certainly for a long time. Okay. And yet here I'm reading this letter and I'm seeing that a governor, a leader of a state in a very conservative southern state, is basically saying, this is why we need this plant decriminalized. Let's not even talk about the legalization for a second. Getting rid of the federal illegality will be a huge win for this industry, whether that comes to the rescheduling or a complete descheduling, or finally sometime or other the States Act actually gets talked about and people look at it from an objective standpoint and see how that bill perhaps could be the key to the whole thing, because it does set up a regulatory body for the plant, or at least taking advantage of just one regulatory body, if you will.
Yeah.
And I was, saying to myself, this would have never happened 5, 10, 15 years ago. And yet here we have, and he's not the only governor, I'm sure, that has reached out to the president. But, there is something going on in Washington right now, and we have a perfect example to talk about it, even though we know that this recording will be released in about a week or so. But in the week past, Terry Colt became sworn in, approved as the head of the DEA. And while he was going through his confirmation hearings, he sat in front of the senators and said, cannabis is going to be a priority of mine for sure, right? And of course, when pressed on it, he wouldn't say which way he was leaning on the rescheduling process or anything. But here he has the first DEA admin memo is released last week. There's 10 things on it, from fentanyl and drug cartels internationally and all these things, and not one word referred to cannabis or marijuana or even hemp, for crying out loud. Even though we know hemp is legal, and let's not get into that. We'll get into that in a second. But basically what this tells me is this guy stood in front of our senators under oath, I'm pretty sure, right? I mean, and lied. He lied because it's not a priority. It wasn't even on his first day agenda for memos. This makes my blood boil, Aaron. Because if you can't take people at their word, you don't want to be working with them, respecting them, or have anything to do with them. Your word is what is invaluable.
Well, I mean, they're in Washington, so but yeah, it's really disappointing, and I think I hold out some hope here in that, but at least we do have a president who's on record as supporting this, and who has a track record of kind of intervening where he sees fit to put lower ranking officials in line with his agenda. So that's probably the only way that this will be prioritized. It's going to come straight from the White House. And so, and obviously, even under, if we were sitting here in a Harris administration, we might see the same kind of situation, because the DEA clearly, they're not going to be fans of cannabis reform. We know that's just not in their DNA. We saw through the process in the last administration, there was a lot of kind of back channel conversations back to the Project Sam, and a lot of kind of shady, underhanded things happening that were stalling the process. And so it is, you have every right to be infuriated by it, because this is something that, I mean, we're talking rescheduling now doesn't legalize the industry. It doesn't even address the issues that Governor Beshear is asking to have addressed. Right. It's just kind of like bringing federal law into the 1980s, maybe. I'll be generous. I mean, and
that's when the war on drugs began, though, right? In the 1980s, there and everything, right?
The medical value of cannabis is well documented, in the 20th century. I mean, California, it brings it into line with maybe California of 1992. So that's when. So these states were starting to pass these medical initiatives. Now most of the country, including red states like Ohio, Montana, and Missouri, people are living under laws that are successfully regulating the adult use market. And these laws are widely popular. 2/3 or more, maybe, of Americans, or depending on the poll you look at, support full legalization, and something like 90 or more, like in the polling, they don't even do polling on medical marijuana anymore, because it's like, well, almost every single person they call supports it. So it's like, what's the point? Everybody supports medical except Congress. Okay. There's 400 people in the country that don't support it.
These are facts. I mean, we're laughing. It's gallows humor, for a lot of people in this industry. The valuations of the biggest MSOs have gone from 37 billion down to 4 billion, according to the last thing that I just read this past week. And yet Massachusetts, the first East Coast state to go to adult use, passed the $8 billion sales level this past week. So people are still buying it. People are still using it. The alcohol industry is getting into the cannabis industry because they see that more people are using cannabis every day than are using alcohol. Mm-hmm. It's a threat to their industry, or at least the profits that they've enjoyed in their industry, which, as a business, you obviously are always looking to raise your profit margins. And the margins in cannabis are just so small. It's kind of, it's strangling in many ways. And yet I still see people opening up dispensaries in different states. So many dispensaries have closed, others have opened to take their place. It's a great lesson in supply and demand of a product, of a cultivated product, a live thing. and very tough to control. I don't. Would you go back into if things were the same? Would you want to get involved with cannabis 15, 20 years ago if you knew all this was going to go on?
Oh, for sure. I mean, when you look back, like it's super frustrating in the moment. When you step back, again, we've made huge progress. People still want legal cannabis. The cannabis consumers want to be able to go into a store where they know it's tested, it's labeled with the appropriate dosage for them and choose that product. They're willing to pay the taxes, but within reason. And that's, why we still have an industry. But I mean, one thing I don't know even I don't know I could take credit for this, but one thing or blame is that like I think when I look back, I feel like the industry got over its skis in that you've got these big MSOs that are in, and they're throwing money around in politics, but frankly, 90% of it is completely just wasted, flushed down the drain because they didn't see this as a movement. And it was people that got involved because, we were out there at the front of this when this was all cannabis advocates that made up the industry, calling this an industry even before it really was one in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when we started passing the laws to where, these larger MSOs or large, investors that were well capitalized could see that they could make money in this, they came at it just from that approach. We're just going to make money and get in and get out, which frankly was never a good plan because this isn't federally legal. There's so many challenges in that that now to see all of this, the industry kind of being swallowed up by these MSOs that don't seem to really respect the plant, don't seem to care about, human freedom and all. They care about the bottom line. It's, a lot of times their agenda's in line with those of us who are, really advocates. But at the end of the day, that's all they care about. And frankly, they're not investing their resources wisely. I mean, we saw, back to the DEA situation, we saw the huge amounts of money being poured into the rescheduling effort. That who knows where that went, but huge amounts of money from MSOs that thought they were, they hired all the best consultants to come in here and then get this thing done in time for Biden. And then they decided, oh, well, Biden's not gonna do it right. Let's hold out for Trump. He's going to save us. Which just seems insane to anybody who's been actually paying attention. But now here we are, and I'm glad that they're, I guess, invested at all, but it's very disheartening to see that when I see organizations like NCIA or Marijuana Policy Project, NORML, who have, and those two in particular have been doing it much longer than NCIA for decades, seeing funding dry up and then going, then seeing, Curaleaf and these other groups, running these ridiculous initiatives in places like Florida without even asking for the help of the organizations that are experts in this. It's and then failing and just flushing more money down the toilet. It got me on a rant now. See, this is what happens when this is the exit interview part of the interview. I got a little bit of leeway here.
I get it. And I've also tried to look at that perspective, bringing me down to lobby days. I was so enlightened about our political system. I thank you. I'll thank you for the rest of my life, to be honest with you, because it really meant a lot for me to really see how this works. And it's funny, you mentioned the MSOs, and the MSOs are easy targets. And I used to defend the MSOs because I thought that the industry needed that kind of money to put into the lobbying effort in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And now that the money has shrunk and their valuations have shrunk, the money has shrunk. And now what do? To me, it is always about the money, isn't it, Aaron? It isn't about the person with cancer and getting access to the medicine they need, which is what a lot of people really want and believe in, right? It's about pandering to the investors, to those that are putting their money up there because they believe something good is going to happen, or they're just going to make money. And then you've got the little craft grower, whether it be the home grower or whatever, and they're surviving by the skin of their teeth, but they're surviving. Mm-hmm. So, is this a market change? Is this a correction, a market correction? Because the market correction actually happened a couple of years ago, when the money started to drive up. That being said, now what are we going to do? How is this industry going to rally together and work together so that we can at least express the need to move forward on something? And I saw the attorney generals from the different states asking for safe banking. Again, how many times have we heard safe banking? You guys got the Safe Banking Act actually through the House at one point, didn't you? And now,
yeah, 7 times.
Right.
I mean, I do want to, I guess I'll say I am grateful that the MSOs are investing what they are investing, and there should be more. But the challenge has been that, and I think frankly it's egos, and it's being manipulated by consultants in DC that are telling them I know how to do it better. So I've got the ex-Speaker of the House. I won't name names, but everybody knows who I'm referring to, who's not actually involved in the effort, but I've got his name on there and he's taking his cut. And we know what we're doing. We're going to get this done. All the other, those old timers like me, MPP, normal, they don't know what they're doing. Support, pay us 10x more. We're going to get it done. And it's like, that's kind of what we've been up against for years now. But so to see all that money just go down the tubes is super frustrating. But that said, to your question, that could be invested and should be invested in groups that actually have a track record of success, that have full-time people that have followed these laws in the states, in DC, that are, and maybe that we sometimes have our hotshot lobbyists as well, but we have staff that are managing them and making sure that they're held accountable to their contract, the milestones we hold them accountable to, rather than just blowing money like it's nothing. And that's why if they're listening, definitely implore these bigger companies to invest in some of the legacy organizations that made it possible for them to even have a business in the first place. And that's NCIA, MPP, Normal, and others, I'm sure. And that's what needs to happen. And then the other big challenge that we need to tackle is this hemp issue. And that's a tough one. I mean, even within the NCIA ranks, we have a lot of people that would like to see that just go away.
Yeah.
But it's not going away, and it's something that we got. We saw what happened in Florida. We got to get the hemp and the marijuana sides to come up with a policy that works well for both.
And I was going to bring up the hemp thing too. I think, but you got to understand about hemp. You have to take a step back to 2018 and to see how that farm bill in 2018 got passed, who was behind it, how did that happen? Because I'll never forget the first 24 hours when I asked the late Bill Downing here in Massachusetts, a great advocate. I didn't ask him. I just said, "Oh, by the way, did you hear the farm bill passed?" And he went, "You mean they legalized the plant?" And I went, "Yeah." I mean, because, 0.3% THC was the federal definition. Here's the question I have. We all know that Congress created this mess, or did they? They may have actually done this because it makes it even more difficult for the cannabis industry to be one. They split it in half. They absolutely split it in half.
Yeah.
I to this day,
I think you're giving them a lot of credit, but I hear you. I don't.
And honestly, until I have a source that can confirm this thing,
yeah.
I'm a conspiracy theorist. There's no doubt,
And
but I can't
the thing
imagine.
is they didn't really, nobody saw this coming. I didn't see it coming, and I'm a so-called expert, right? Like I didn't know that I didn't know that the science was possible. I mean, I just hadn't thought about it honestly at the time.
Did you?
I know there were people probably in my circle that were a lot smarter than me. But yeah, I mean it just didn't see it coming, and it. So I mean, I guarantee Mitch McConnell didn't see it coming.
No,
right?
of course not. No, of course not. And he saw we're going to limit the amount of that cannabinoid. Is that what it's called? THC. That's the one that gets you high, right? I mean, that's about his knowledge, right? And as opposed to talking to a botanist or to a scientist, because I know human behavior, and this is a product that people figured out how to get high and how to get that product for at least 100 years since it's been prohibited. Okay. And they weren't going to stop. They figured out a way. The botanists and the scientists figured out a way to get high from 0.3% THC in the hemp plant. No one should be shocked by this. And yet here we are, 7 years later. The Congress was waiting for the FDA to give guidelines on how much of the minor cannabinoids can be infused into food products and what have you. Have we heard it? Did I miss something? Did I miss that? I'm not quite sure that's ever happened, right?
No.
They have screwed this up, okay, since that bill, to be honest. And yet it was that bill that really started the green rush, because the whole world, human behavior, figured, oh, you know what? We're going to get in now, because watch what happens. All these states are going to go legal now. And the green rush, boom, green wall, not happening. Valuations have crashed. Everything.
Yeah.
And it's a mess right now, Aaron. I've never been so frustrated about something that I believe in, and yet it only makes me dig my heels in more.
Yeah, it is. It's frustrating, but I mean, you think this hemp thing. I mean, the other side of that is that you have, Texas, right? It's the second or third largest state in the country, where, there was no hope of marijuana legalization there. They just now got an effective medical cannabis law, right? A couple weeks ago.
Right. It was the same. It was it was like the same weekend that he vetoed the hemp
Yeah.
And now that's back in play.
And so it is in play, but hopefully it continues to, they continue to push against prohibition. So now you have all of these, you have a huge portion of the American population that wouldn't otherwise have access to a healthier alternative to alcohol and over-the-counter pain medicines, that now can access cannabis through, a flawed system, yes, but they can access cannabis and cannabinoid products through the hemp law that's in Texas that never would have existed. Right. This is completely ridiculous politics. It's because they're calling it hemp versus calling it marijuana when it's the same plant. But I'll take the win, because it's allowing this product to get into more hands, which is a good thing. I mean, that's why I think that as long as it's used responsibly, you think about the disparity between alcohol and cannabis, and if even like 0.5% of the people who would be drinking alcohol shift to cannabis, that's tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of lives saved over the course of the next several decades. That's so right. It's a lot. It's it's saving lives.
That's right. And again, both sides, keep it out of the under 21s, keep it away from at least educate the under 21s about why we're keeping it away from you, because human behavior being human behavior, you tell me you can't do that, I'm going to figure out a way to do it, because I was a rebel and I was spoiled and whatever. But I do want to ask you this question, because I think I know the answer to this. Is there one person in Congress who was in Congress and perhaps isn't anymore, whether they've retired or moved on or got voted out, that you had a very special relationship with, and you will cherish that friendship, I'm going to guess, as you continue on with your new chores, as it were?
Well, I mean, a big friend of NCIA and me and the industry would be Earl Blumenauer from Portland. Congressman Blumenauer is just, he was a stalwart supporter for reform, I think before I was born, into the early 70s, when he was in the Oregon State House. And he was somebody who, and he hasn't passed on or anything. He just retired out of,
frustration.
Probably frustration with Congress. Right. I would retire too. I don't want to speak for him, and hopefully he'll be on here on this podcast. He's interested, so we'll talk about that. But
great.
He was one of the few members that really kept up on the issue and made it a priority, despite all the other things happening in his district that he had to focus on. He would call and ask for a download of what's happening in the industry on a regular basis without asking for money. So that was always a surprise. It's kind of, frankly, it's surprising when they call you and they don't ask you for money, and not to disparage the other members, but they're so busy and they have so much fundraising that they have to do, that their party's forcing them to do. Even a safe seat like he has to raise money so that he could then contribute it back to other races that are less safe, right? So he's somebody that I'll always remember as, and the industry and movement should remember as a really important leader in Congress for going way back. And I think honorable mention would be Dana Rohrabacher as well on the Republican side, because I want to be bipartisan here.
You should be.
Congressman Rohrabacher, he and I didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, especially when it came to the integrity of the election and January 6th and all that. So it's hard for me to put that aside. But if you do put that aside, that whole insurrection, put that aside, he also was very he really passionate about this issue. I know he was a medical patient himself, and was open about that, which was at a time when it was he was the only Republican, save but Ron Paul, Senator Rand Paul's dad, that was willing to do it and was willing to come forward, and I believe the only member of Congress that actually at the time admitted to being a consumer of cannabis. So those two really did a lot for us.
Well, you know what? You've done a lot for me, and you've done a lot for the industry, and I thank you for your time, your efforts, and your passion for the cause. I remember driving up to Portland, Maine, back in 28. I want to say it had to be 2018, maybe 2019, when we first met. And I have history there, so whenever I have an opportunity to go back to where my sportscaster career began, I always go back. Got to meet you, and that was really one of the biggest highlights of my life at that point, Aaron. I've had a few others since then, but still, I'm glad that we've continued our relationship, and I've always respected what you did and what you do, and as well as working now with the NCIA and the people that are still answering the phones and answering the emails and trying to get members, so that it's still active, and
That's right.
like all organizations, help out by a $4 donation, a $10 donation, anything that you want. If you took half the money that was spent on the product and put it into the hands of the various people that impact the laws, all of a sudden things might change again, because everyone understands the power of that dollar bill in politics and in policy making. And this is how our country works, for better or for worse. And for the most part, Aaron, it's pretty good here, right? We have a pretty good gig going. It just seems to be everybody needs more of a piece of the pie than they should be asking for.
Yeah. I mean, you say half. I mean, I would be happy with like 1%, 2%. I mean, that would be game changing. That would be more than
right.
That would be more than all of the lobbying efforts, including the MSOs combined.
Right. Well, maybe there should be, why not? This industry is filled with taxes and fees on top of fees on top of fees. I mean, maybe it's a, free the plant fee for $1 for every sale that goes out. I don't know. I'm throwing things out because you get to do that in America. You get to speak your mind. So
That's right.
Anyway, we want to thank Aaron Smith, certainly, and the entire NCIA family, as well as our supporters for this podcast, for resurrecting this podcast and getting it going. And I understand that the Voice of Cannabis podcast will continue, Aaron, right?
It better.
That's how I feel too. And we want to thank our sponsor, Buds Group, the consulting group out of the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, as well as the Maverick PR Group out of Colorado. So for the no longer executive director of the NCIA, Aaron Smith, I'm Jimmy Young. Thank you again for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and support the cause.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
Welcome to the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis. Join hosts Aaron Smith and Jimmy Young as they dive into the pulse of the cannabis industry.
We look forward to the introduction of the Safe Banking Act in this Congress, and we will be doing everything we can to rally support around that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for y'all, all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important. Being on the Hill was great.
Featuring weekly guests who break down big topics like standardization, evolving regulations, and exclusive member spotlight.